Right.
So, as I see it, there has to be a future fulfillment of these prophecies, which implies that the covenant with Abraham is still standing. Now, in the Old Testament prophecies about the return of the Jews at the end of days, you have actually three elements: a return to the land, a time of trouble, and an outpouring of the Holy Spirit. You can find that in Isaiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Zechariah in particular. So we have now the return to the land, we have the time of trouble, and anyone can see from current events that that time of trouble is certainly not over. It's likely to reach a climax, either sooner or later. The outpouring of the Holy Spirit, especially in the book of Zechariah, says that I'll pour out my Spirit. Zechariah 12:10 I'm talking about now. Let's actually read it so we get it totally right. Which is in the context of a world controversy over Jerusalem. I will pour on the house of David, on the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they have pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. So the Holy Spirit is poured out and causes Israel, the remnant of Israel in Jerusalem, to look upon me whom they have pierced. So who is the one who's been pierced? Who is the one who's also the only son? Why would they mourn for him? Because they recognize Yeshua as the Messiah. According to the New Testament, what's the work of the Holy Spirit? Actually to point to Jesus. So all of this has to mean that there is a future for Israel, and indeed, to my mind, that current events are significant.
Right.
And that the trouble now is actually, God is allowing that trouble to bring Israel. If you look in Jeremiah 30, speaks about the time of Jacob's trouble. It says that in that trouble, God is going to correct something Israel's got wrong. So what's Israel got wrong? It's the identity of the Messiah. So in the last days, there's this outpouring of the Spirit which points Israel to Jesus as the Messiah.
So Israel has to be there.
I want a quick question, a quick answer if possible.
Not with Tony or me. You can't have quick answers.
Right. Anti-Semitism is virtually rife in this country now. I find it on more or less every street corner in big towns. What does a Christian who loves Jews do about it? Do they pass by on the other side? Pray and do nothing? So I'm going to leave the answer to you, Tony. Over to you.
Well, it's a hard one. I mean, I think you pray, and you do, if you have the opportunity to speak out about it. I mean, recently we had an attack on 2 Orthodox Jews in Golders Green by a man who came from Crickerwood, and sadly the man's name was Mohammed, so I guess you know where he's coming from, and he was motivated by anti-Semitism, but one can try and reason with people who are anti-Semitic and show them the prejudices or the hostility. I mean, I was preparing for a sermon on Revelation 2 the other day doing the church at Smyrna, and I just typed into the internet the phrase synagogue of Satan, which comes into it, and I was quite horrified at what came up. Some of them from Christians. I mean, even one man who I know who's written books about the New Age, who I think has gone a bit off beam as well, called Tex Mars, but he was writing some stuff which was blatantly anti-Semitic.
Calling today synagogues of
the synagogue of Satan is the Jewish plot to take over the world. And you may have heard of the the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which motivated the anti-Semites in Russia, anti-communists as well actually, and then got into hands of Hitler, and today is actually spread throughout the Middle East in Islamic anti-Israel bookshops and so on. So the same sort of spirit is still there.
So it's certainly prayer. That's one thing we all can do is pray for the Jewish people, and pray for the people that are being anti-Semitic, that the Lord would open their eyes and educate them.
I mean, I think this idea, for example, the Jewish conspiracy is the big thing, that the Jews are some sinister plot who are trying to rule the world. I mean, if that's the case, then they're not doing very well, since most of the world seems to be anti-Zionist actually, and the influence is quite small in the world, really. But people believe all sorts of very bizarre things about Jewish people, and that's one of the things which really gets to them, because they can see this prejudice and this hatred, which ultimately comes from Satan. I mean, there's no question about it.
Talking about prayer, we've got a couple of calls on the line, but maybe you could just quickly answer this. I mean, there was several parts to this one, but Joanna, she ends up, I am not sure how to best pray for the Jewish people. What do you suggest?
Well, you could start with Romans 10. My heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. If you pray for somebody to be saved, you're going to want to do good to them and to pray for their welfare. So if you pray for somebody to be saved and they don't get saved, you won't go and throw stones through their windows and show them what jolly rotten people they are because they don't believe in Jesus. So that's the heart to begin with. Clearly, obviously the Jewish people are both in Israel and scattered throughout the earth, so you have to pray for them in different countries, communities who have faced different circumstances. The Jews in Israel certainly face an external threat which is growing from Hamas, Hezbollah, and indeed even from Iran, but also praying for the Messianic Jewish community who have the opportunities to share the faith. I mentioned earlier this witness at the New Age Fair. That's one of the areas where Jewish people are coming to the Lord. Russian Jews coming to the Lord. Most of the Messianic congregations, indeed most of the Messianic Jewish people in this country, tend to come from less religious backgrounds, so one could really pray that more Orthodox people might come to faith. One thing which quite irritates me at times is that people think that it's all happening in our generation. Having worked in a Jewish ministry and seeing the history of what was happening, for example, with people like David Barron, who was a Hebrew Christian in the last century, and the large numbers of quite prominent Jewish people who came to faith then, and who were then very much used of the Lord to spread the gospel, not just to Jewish people, but even in foreign missions around the world, and to pray that God can raise up that caliber of Jewish people who can be used of God to really
so it's happening in other generations, and we trust will continue.
Sometimes the Messianic movement today thinks they're the first ones, but when you read the history of some of the British Jewish missions in the last century, you can see
there's nothing new under the sun.
Revelation 2:9, one explanation is those who say they're Jews and are not Jews. There was some group that was claiming to be Jewish. And the word synagogue actually means an assembly. So it doesn't just mean what we would understand as a synagogue. It can just mean an assembly of Satan who were therefore persecuting the church in Smyrna.
How do you feel? It's interesting this because Hebrews obviously was written. How do you feel using the book of Hebrews today in witnessing and communicating with the Jewish people?
I would use it probably more in teaching people who've already come to faith. It's quite a difficult book to use actually for unbelievers. So I did actually once do a study in Hebrews at a Jewish believers' home, and there were unbelievers who came who actually were quite challenged by it. Because the problem with Jewish people is that, first off, they don't believe anything of the New Testament is inspired of God. So that's why sometimes if you can show from the Old Testament, which they do believe, in theory anyway, is inspired by God. But certainly, there are parts of Hebrews which definitely you can use, particularly the part about, without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin, and to show the connection between the blood of atonement in the Old Testament and the New Testament. The bits about Melchizedek are a little bit difficult, but certainly.
Melchizedek's an interesting character, but we're not going there now, not with 15 minutes left on the programme.